Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first webinar of an updated digital forensics series, part of a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. My name is Guy Coward, and I'll be your MC for this webinar and for the duration of the course. Your mentor is the lovely and talented Matt Constable, who I'll say good day with later. Wherever you're watching this, we hope you're safe and well comfortable, because we'll probably be running long. But before we begin, some housekeeping. All webinars for this course will be held at 8 p.m. Sydney time, but this, of course, will be across different time zones relative to UTC time, and even across different days. So congratulations us on excellent planning. We figure most of the domestic live attendees will be busy on the Easter Monday public holidays for webinar 3. So we'll chat on Tuesday. That's also the first week of the switch back to standard time for New South Wales, Victoria, and NIMS that changed their times. So be careful, Queenslanders and you Western McGowanites. If you or us have messed up the timing, don't worry. We'll make recordings anyway for everyone who can't attend on a given occasion or who just stuffs up the time. But despite the recordings, if you can make it, we hope you'll attend the live webinars and contribute to what is hopefully a collaborative learning environment. We quite clearly use Zoom for our webinars and encourage questions and the use of chat throughout the course. We ask that you direct all questions relevant to course content to the Q&A section, and that you send all administration type questions, dates, details, resource availability, and all those sorts of things to Hannah in the chat. You can chat with Hannah specifically or to your fellow students as well, and you can make that choice by toggling through the Dropbox once you open the chat log. There are usually really experienced attendees who will be most helpful with any queries you have. Actually, I might chuck another poll up now and ask a more sensible questions. Let's go poll number 1, and we'll talk about your experience levels as I'm going through this. Yeah, but anyway, the experienced people often, augment the I guess people's understanding of the content. So feel free to go for it in the chat. We'll have Q&A sessions at the end of each webinar, or if a question is particularly relevant, I'm quite happy to interrupt Matt, and we'll talk for far too long about the interesting questions. I should also mention that one of my favorite things to do is see how much longer Matt can keep a compelling webinar running than the hour that we allocate. There's every chance we'll run long, particularly in the later weeks. If this isn't ideal for you, first of all, I'm sorry. Feel free to leave when you need to. That's absolutely fine because of the recordings. Second, I really do believe that the extra time Matt essentially donates to us and you totally outweighs the downside, and I'm always grateful for it. For those who've never taken part in a short course with us, first of all, welcome. IT Masters is a training organisation that exists as a partner to CSU, who we work with to create and deliver a number of master's level courses. We also market these courses on their behalf and hope that the best way to do that is give it some of it away free. These short courses are essentially marketing, but hopefully a public service as well. But if we do a good job of, delivering these short courses, we figure potential students will be encouraged to enroll in the full masters if and when it suits them. With that marketing spiel said, we want this course to be useful and a rewarding exercise in its own right. I hope you learn some useful information, have a bit of fun, hopefully make some connections with your fellow students in the forums. And there's 3,500 people enrolled in the course, so there's plenty of options there. I want to thank Hannah for being around tonight and for the whole course. Hannah is basically the administrative and technical manager for short courses for IT Masters now. She's also responsible for the learn.itmasters.edu.au website and the course page, which is where you find everything you need for this course. Recordings, readings, forums, tasks that Matt's scheduled for you. If you have any questions tonight or later on about, I guess, the details of the course, there's some contact details there and you can chat with us using that. Next week, I'll talk a bit about CSU and give you an idea of what studying with us is all about, and how these short courses can help you in completing a postgraduate course of study. So if you have any questions about that sort of stuff, please hold them over. Hopefully I'll answer those then. I'll also next week have heaps to say about some weird, potentially good news after COVID about, like government settings that are decreasing their cost because tertiary education is in dire trouble in terms of cash flow and desperate for students. So Advantage U, there are huge savings available at the moment. So it could be a good time if you've been sort of weighing it and hasn't quite worked for you. If you like, if you're keen, I don't even know when when the next study session starts. I've been out of the loop a bit, but if you want to get going, you can get in touch. I'll just share these experience results, and it's as usual, sort of a little bit of experience, looking towards building some real expertise. So hopefully that'll be useful for Matt. And I'll go just quickly. If you're keen on getting going with your study pathway because you've already made the decision you want to get into it, just chuck a yes in here. Yes, please, heavens no, to us contacting you this week, and we can cut out the spiel and you can get going. We'll just give you a call or email or whatever. Anyway, it's time to welcome Matt, and thanks for bearing with me as usual, Matt. Matt Constable is great. He has all of the certifications in the IT world, all of the qualifications in the academic world. These short courses with him are heaps of fun. I'll let him to go into the detail, and I'm contractually obliged to say, hey, Matt, talk now.
Thank you, Guy, as ever, for your unbelievable introduction. I'm only glad that when you put that first poll up, I wasn't drinking something because I would have spat it all over my keyboard. And I'm glad the microphone was on mute as well because I was laughing quite hard.
Oh, stop.
So, no, thank you for your introduction. As ever, you are the master of all, master of ceremonies. So, welcome. With that said, and the back patting. That's it. Over. Welcome everyone. So we've got an excellent turnout, over 500, which is fantastic. So this is week one, obviously, of our digital forensic short course. Now, just off the top of the bat, I want to just say something about this particular short course and what we base it on. So this particular short course, we're going to base off a subject that is run primarily by Charles Sturt University. So that is ITC 597 Digital Forensics. Under the IT Masters umbrella, we also have a forensic subject, which is ITE 513 Forensic Investigations, and they are complementary to each other. And will be, more complementary to each other in the near future when we redevelop our subject that we do at IT Masters. So this particular course, though, is based on this this core subject, and I first of all want to acknowledge Dr. Arif Khan, who is normally the lecturer at CSU that takes this particular subject through most sessions. For his contribution to the content that is coming up over the next 4 weeks. So the slides are largely based on content from that particular subject to give you some insight into what that subject's all about, and where appropriate, I will add some information into the mix that also will point you to the differences between this particular subject we base this course on and the elective subject that we do at IT Masters. So without further ado, let's get the show on the road. So this evening, we're going to talk about an introduction to digital forensics. So look at some definitions and some introductory information. So I noticed in the poll that the first serious poll that Guy had up earlier, that there's a little bit of a mix. So there's a few people with some experiences, but are looking to mainly augment that, or some reminders. So please, you guys out there that are experienced, if you feel you can add something to the conversation, then please do so. I'm happy for people to interact and help each other out. I will also say that particularly when we talk about the areas around investigations and law and legislations, this may vary from country to country and state to state, or jurisdiction to jurisdiction, basically. So what I'm talking about is where I am particularly based. So keep in mind that with the legal side of things, it may be different wherever you are in the world. We'll then look at some of the topics, introductory topics that ITC 597 looks at. So that's a digital forensics course. And then we'll start to unwrap some of the forensic tools. And in the next few weeks, we'll look at, so next week we look at data acquisition. The week after, we look at forensic investigations around operating systems, social media, email, virtualization, so some topics around that. And then in the last week, we're going to look at some specific tools, some forensic tools that you might use, because there are literally millions of them, and there is no limit to either the complexity or the simplicity of the tools that you can use in performing a forensic investigation. It really just depends on what you're comfortable with and what suits the actual investigation that you're undertaking. So about me, I'm not going to read through all that, but I've been around the traps for quite a while now. Worked in networking, security, wireless, voice over IP, contact center across a number of different industries. I've been on customer side and integrator side of the fence. So I like to think I've got a pretty broad experience base, that pretty comprehensive experience base, but there will be those of you out there that will, make me look like a beginner. So by all means, please don't think that I am the be all and end all and have all the answers. There'll be plenty of answers out there that you guys will have too, and I would invite you to bring them to the table as often as you like, both in these sessions through the Q&A application and also in the discussion forums on the Moodle website as well.
Before you go on, Matt, he's being modest, everyone, but also some of the people in the chat are asking about your PhD, how that's going, because
they are not.
They are. It was Sebastian, because of course Matt does a lot of these short courses, and we had one course where he did one session and we talked about it. All right. Last I heard, it was good.
All right, I'll give you a very, very brief rundown of where that's going. Yeah, it's going good. Okay, so digital forensics definition. No, we're going well at this stage. So thank you for those who have asked. And no, I haven't finished. I'm about halfway through in terms of time. So come back and ask me about that in a couple of years' time. I'll probably still be doing MOOCs with my good friend Guy at that stage.
You bloody well hope so.
So do I. All right, so digital forensics, a definition. This is what we're going to, this is a definition we're going to use within our context for this short course, and also used within the context of the subject ITE 597. So it is the application of computer science and investigative procedures for a legal purpose involving the analysis of digital evidence after proper search authority, chain of custody, validation with mathematics. That sounds interesting. Use of validated tools, repeatability, reporting, and possible expert presentation. Wow. Okay, there's a lot there to unpack, isn't there? What we're basically saying in a nutshell is we're using computer science and computerized digital tools, and we're using procedures that we borrow, really steal, from the normal, typical forensic investigators and detectives and police work. So they're the same investigative procedures. Okay, now it does say legal purpose, but we can also use our digital forensics for internal company investigations as well. So it may not be that we're actually investigating a crime as by a definition of a law, but we may be investigating an infraction against a particular policy within an organization. So then that becomes a human resources issue. We still need to provide evidence and a detail of what actually happened with that infraction, so that then we can then go and take up remediation action with the person involved. So it doesn't always have to be legal. Okay, for the purpose of the subject, ITC 597, we spend more time talking about the legal side of it, but it can equally apply to a non-legal investigation as well. Search authority, okay, so that's talking about in a legal sense, getting your search warrants and those sorts of the legal side of that, so you can actually go out and search and seize evidence. Chain of custody is something you probably don't hear about it as much in 597, but in the subject I run, 513 forensic investigations, we beat chain of custody to death with a very large stick. So we talk about it a lot, and it's a very important concept to get your head around from a digital forensic perspective. Validation with mathematics, I know that will, that will have people up and ready and listening and ready to go. But really it's quite boring. So we probably won't talk about that too much, but there is some mathematics involved, but you don't need to know any of it, obviously. And we'll talk about that when the time comes. So hopefully might be early in the slides so you don't go to sleep before I'm finished. Validated tools, repeatability, reporting. Okay, that's all about making sure that you're using tools that are appropriate for the job. It says validated tools. That's validated from a technical expert perspective. And as I said before, they can be really, really simple tools like things like Traceroute or Ping or Notepad. They are valid forensic tools depending on what you're looking for, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Repeatability is just about being able to do the same action and get the same result. So again, that's proving that the process that you use or the tool that you use is actually fit for purpose and gives you the desired result. So if you were to use, for example, you're investigating something, you use 2 different tools and you came up with a completely different answer, not good. We don't want to do that. Particularly from a legal sense, we need to have repeatable endpoints. And then the possible expert presentation is about you as a forensic investigator actually standing up in some forum, whether that's in a court or in a boardroom somewhere, actually talking about what it is that you've found in your investigation. So there's a lot, there's a whole heap of stuff to unpack in that simple definition. There is a NIST definition. Now, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They're an American government organization that have a veritable plethora of documents relating to security, all things security, all types of security design, you name it, they've got it. And if you're not familiar with them, I wholeheartedly recommend that you surf across to their website, www.nist.gov, and have a look at the resources available, because particularly for those of you that don't have a strong security background, that will be fantastic information for you there. So what do NIST say? NIST say that it is the application of computer science and investigative procedures involving the examination of digital evidence. That sounds familiar. Following proper search authority, chain of custody, validation with mathematics, use of validated tools, repeatability, reporting, and possible expert testimony. Well, where did we get that first one from? I think that's probably come straight from NIST. It's also the application of science to the identification, collection, examination, and analysis of data while preserving the integrity of the information and maintaining a strict chain of custody for the data. Now, you could easily take those digital and computer science references out of that and apply that to forensic crime investigation. It's exactly the same thing. So what do you need to be a successful digital forensics practitioner? Well, you need to have lots of knowledge about computers and technology, both contemporary and legacy. So that means you need to know about old stuff as well, because there might be an occasion where you need to investigate a crime that's been perpetrated using a Windows XP device, for example. And if you have no idea what Windows XP is, you're going to find it difficult, as a very simple example. But you need to have lots of knowledge, a broad range of knowledge. You don't necessarily have to have an in-depth knowledge, a really, really deep level of understanding. So you might be, for instance, if you want to do network forensics, doesn't mean you have to go and get a Cisco certified internet networking expert certificate. Okay, you don't have to be a CCIE, but you do have to have a good broad understanding of network architecture, switching and routing, so on and so forth, okay, to intelligently be able to investigate in that sort of environment. And that's a set with computers, whether it's storage systems, whether it's looking at email forensics, virtualization, social media, whatever you're looking at, you need to have some level of knowledge, a good level of knowledge about that particular area in order to be able to successfully investigate in that area. And if you don't, you need to know where you can go to find out that knowledge from a trusted, reliable source, or pass it on to someone who does have that knowledge. you need to be professional about your conduct. Well, that's hardly going to be surprising. I mean, all of us who are in professional vocations or professional jobs, we have a certain level of professional conduct that we have to adhere to. Being a digital forensic practitioner is no different, and particularly from a legal perspective, if you're working on legal cases, then there needs to be there's a higher level of expectation around your conduct. The sense, which is not so common but needs to be. So common sense is something that you need. So not to take leaps of faith or jump to rash conclusions, but to sit down and analyze things, think about things, and apply what you know to the things that you are finding in your evidence gathering, and try to make sense of it in some coherent way. I mean, you need some common sense, you need ability to think outside the box. So that's to think a little abstractly or a little differently. So not be caught with tunnel vision and maintain so much focus on something that you can't see outside that little sphere. And attention to detail is really important as well. So you've got to be able to, dot the I's and cross the T's, and really go over things really carefully to make sure that you don't miss anything. And then probably most importantly, in all walks of life, with no matter what you're doing, to be successful, you must be persistent. Okay, you have to be braver for 5 seconds longer than someone else and you'll succeed. Okay, you just have to keep pushing. Almost impossible to beat or overcome if you never give up. So persistence, yes, it's a dot point on this slide, useful as a digital forensic practitioner, but applies to anything you do in life. If you're persistent, you will ultimately succeed and you'll get to where you need to be.
So, Matt, just a couple quick ones.
Absolutely.
Of course, this is a refresher course.
Yep.
How much has digital forensics changed in the 6 years since we last did the short course?
In terms of what the subject, or as an industry as a whole?
I would say I guess I'm more interested in the industry as a whole, like the subject changes as and when it needs to.
But I guess as we were sort of alluding to before we actually started this evening, you and I had a bit of a conversation about this, and I think the main way in which it's changed is probably the tools and the focus, so that the types of investigation that you might be doing. So in terms of a digital forensic perspective, obviously, we're looking at digital systems, we're looking at IT systems, we're looking at computer crime. So computer crime evolves all the time. Like, say, for instance, the last time we ran this course, we probably weren't really talking about ransomware all that much, whereas we'll talk about that a little bit in, I think, week 3. Or week 4, I don't know, somewhere along the way anyway. We'll talk a little bit about ransomware. So the focus that we need to have in terms of what sort of crimes we're investigating has changed somewhat. And obviously the tools are getting better and more sophisticated and more varied. So as I said before, you could still have really simple tools, and you can, you can be a perfectly adequate, you can have a perfectly adequate forensic toolkit using open source tools, if you're comfortable in that space. Or you may find, you could pay thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for the either bespoke or commercial forensic packages that you can buy, like Ncase and things like that. So they're probably the two main things I think that have probably changed the most, is the tools and the potentially the types of crimes that we're looking at. They evolve all the time. In terms of the process, the legal process, the process that you go through as a forensic investigator, not a lot of that has changed. The way you investigate a computer perpetrated crime is still, the same now as what it was 5 years ago. There's still certain steps and checks and balances that you have to go through. And a lot of that involves around this concept of chain of custody, rules of best evidence, and making sure that we are able to provide the best evidence to the court or the disciplinary hearing, if you like, in a non-legal sense, providing the best evidence to that we can, and a true reflection of the facts. And so the actual process itself has changed relatively little, and it will probably remain so for forever and a day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, heaps. Yeah, let's keep moving. We'll leave the rest till the end.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian.
So in terms of maintaining our professional conduct, so we're talking about our ethics, our morals, and our standards of behaviour. So basically, don't be a crooked forensic investigator. The idea is that you follow all the processes that we talk about in this subject, and probably more in the forensic investigation subject, so the 513 subject that IT Masters offers. We talk about chain of custody and the rules of best evidence and the investigative process and the order in which you do things. And that's part of your ethics and your morals, is keeping to that, not jumping the gun, not making assumptions, not trying to find things that aren't there. So just follow the bouncing ball and keep to the script. And that's a really key point around that professional conduct. And we can talk about more obvious things, which I don't really want to, but you can mention them in terms of, the typical things, not taking bribes, or, someone saying, hey, if you lose that bit of evidence, I'll, I don't know, buy you a case of beer or whatever it is. Those sorts of things. They're pretty obvious things that everyone thinks of. But what I'm really want to impress on you is that the ethics and morals and standards are really more around the process in which you carry your investigations out more than anything else. So to help with that, we've got to exhibit the highest level of behavior at all times. So really important to maintain our objectivity. Okay, and that can be really hard sometimes depending on the crime that we're investigating. There are certain crimes that are very difficult to, or certain incidents that will resonate with you on a personal level. For instance, things around abuse of children. For a lot of people are really hard to handle because, a lot of us have kids. We love our kids dearly, and we hate to see kids in that sort of defenseless children in that sort of environment. And so you've got to be able to abstract yourself from that and look at things really objectively, because otherwise you end up going down a rabbit hole and end up somewhere that you don't want to be, or it will damage the investigation, and in which case, you've lost the whole point, and you've gone against everything you want to go against anyway. And then maintain your credibility by maintaining confidentiality. So don't go blabbing around everywhere what you're doing and what you found. Keep your cards close to your chest. That's ethical behavior. Telling everyone what you're doing and why you're doing it is not ethical behavior. Standards of skills is also really important as well. So you should make sure that you keep your skills up to date. Okay, yes, we have a skill set around the investigative processes, but we've also got a really high level of skill requirement for the technical side. So, it's all right to say you can get forensic tools that will do a lot of the groundwork for you and put everything into a nice database and spit out reports and all this sort of jazz. But you still have to, as a good forensic investigator, you must surely want and must be able to know the ins and outs of every tool that you're using, so that you don't make mistakes. Because if you make mistakes, you jeopardize the output, so the evidence of your investigation. So it's really important that we keep our skills up to date. And if we're going to go into a different area of investigation, so we're going to do some network forensics and we don't know much about networking, then don't start doing those investigations until you've upskilled appropriately. Pass it off to someone else, get some help in, or decline to take the case if you're an private investigator. The basic idea is stay in your lane, yeah? Stay in your lane. Understand what you're good at and keep to your strengths, because if you don't, you can jeopardize the output of, or jeopardize the result of some very, very serious crimes and court cases potentially if you get it wrong. Or even in the easiest scenario, if you talk about an investigation within a company itself to just an infraction on an email usage policy, for example, you might end up getting someone fired for something they didn't actually do. Okay, if you don't have the expertise, you don't maintain objectivity, and you don't keep things quiet. Okay, in terms of the digital forensic roadmap, there are typically 8 steps that we talk about in this particular subject. So they are search authority, So that is search warrant or an authorization letter in case of corporate investigation. So that's just giving you the go ahead. Someone above you, someone with more authority with you and with the authority to do so, is giving you permission to investigate. That's number one. If you don't have that, nothing else matters. Chain of custody. So that's making sure that any evidence you find, that from the moment you find it, time and date, to the moment you present it in court, time and date, everything that you do, everything that is done by others to that evidence, every trip that evidence takes, every journey it takes, everywhere it is stored, everywhere it is referenced, everywhere it is tested, everywhere it is used, is accounted for. That all has to be completely documented. That's the chain of custody. So that shows, if you get it right, that shows a completely unbroken link from the moment you find the evidence to the moment it is presented in court. You can account for every single step, every single operation that's occurred on that evidence, every single part of the way of that journey. And again, if you don't have that, that then allows defense to come in and say, well, there's some doubt here. What happened in this area here? What happened at this time? You know, how do we know that something wasn't changed? You've changed the evidence in this time. So it allows them to introduce doubt. And that, in a criminal sense, is all they need. They need a reasonable doubt on your evidence to have it thrown out or have it disregarded, okay? We then have imaging and hashing functions. So this is where the mathematics come into it. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of it, but basically we create an image, or we create an exact bit for bit copy of the device that we're trying to, and you know, we're talking about disk drives or solid state drives or some sort of memory device, some sort of storage device. We create an exact image of it. And in fact, we create more than one image. Because if we only create one image and through the process of our investigations, we completely mess it up and destroy it, we've got to go back to the original again. And every time you go back to the original, you run the risk of introducing errors or introducing changes to that original data, that original evidence. And we don't want to do that. So we take an image of the original evidence and we then make copies of that image, and we then do our investigations only on the copies. Okay, so this is a absolute golden rule of digital forensics. We never, well, when I say never, there are circumstances where there are times when you will have to do investigation on the fly on the original evidence. But if you can avoid, if at all possible to avoid it, you would make a copy of it, take it off site, and then do your investigations there. The hashing function is a mathematical function. So a hash is simply a tool, or a hashing tool is simply a tool that you, if you like, you process the evidence that you're looking at using this hashing tool, and it spits out a value, okay, a fixed value. Now that fixed value is completely unique to the evidence that you have run through the tool. So if that evidence changes even just, you know, you've got a Word document and you add a full stop to that Word document and then run the hashing tool again, it will spit out a different value. And so you will automatically know that something has changed. You might not know what has changed, but you know that something's changed in that document. So that's a way of proving the authenticity or the integrity, if you like, of the evidence that you're looking at. Because you've run a hash over the original, this is a value we've got. We run a hash over the image, we get the same value, spits out, therefore the two copies must be identical. If there's a difference in the hash value that's spat out, then the images are different and we have to look at why they're different. Because there's no point investigating an image if it's not an exact replica of the original. Validated tools. So validated tools is really just saying use tools that we know work and we know provide a fixed output. We know what we're going to get from them. So don't go using some experimental tool that you're not sure what's going to come out of it. We then analyze. So we analyze what we found, analyze the output from the tools that we've used. We then pass it through a quality assurance process, which is really just making sure that we run a tool, get the result, analyze it, come to conclusion A. We might run the same tool again, look, analyze, come to conclusion A again. Beauty. We might run a tool, analyze, come to conclusion A, Then we might run another tool, a totally different one. Output data, analyze, still come to the same conclusion. Okay, we're going well. Okay, so we've got content and we've got construct validity. So we've got validity using the same tool, so we know we get the same repeatable outcome, and we've got different validity. We've got two different tools that provide the same output. Okay, so we're going well. We're doing all the right things. We then have to report. So obviously that's what we need to do in the end. We go through we seize the evidence. We get the evidence that we can off through our investigations. We validate it. We validate it. We analyze it. We come up with some hypotheses or some facts about what happened. We write that down in a report and we submit it to whoever hired us for the case, whether it's a police investigator, a lawyer or attorney, or an organisation. And then we might have to possibly be an expert presenter, either in court or just to a boardroom full of people. If we look at digital forensic versus other disciplines, we come up with this thing called the investigations triad. Now, the investigations triad, for those of you that have done the cyber security fundamentals short course, or some of you may have actually done the subject as well, because I know there's some current students out there in MOOC land. You might be familiar with the CIA triad or the CIA DAD triad. And this is sort of the digital forensics equivalent of that. And by the way, if you're not familiar with either of those, it doesn't matter. So on this side, we've got vulnerability and threat assessment and our risk management. So that's about understanding what our assets are, what the threats and vulnerabilities to those assets are, and how much they really effectively mean to our organisation. So we provide a risk rating based on the value of our asset to us as an organisation and what the likelihood is of it being impacted by some vulnerability or threat. We can do network intrusion detection and incident response. So that's about our alerting and monitoring and potentially incident response in preventing, blocking, getting ourselves back to normal operations. And then at the bottom of that, as a platform of that, we have our digital investigations. Okay, and all three of these interact together in order to work in harmony to provide a complete secure solution, or a more complete secure solution. Developing your digital forensic resources. Okay, so as I was saying at the top, we need to be familiar with a lot of different things. So you've got to know more than one computing platform. You might have to know a bit about DOS. Old, yes. Legacy, definitely. Dead in the water, probably. You might come across it. Windows 95, Windows XP. Good golly, how long ago did they go out? But you might come across them, so it's good to have a working knowledge of the operating system underlying. And it's much simpler than the current operating systems in a way. Linux, different flavors. Okay, there's lots of different versions of Linux. At least be familiar with a couple of them. Macintosh, dare I say, Mac OS, which is really just Linux underneath anyway, let's face it, and the current Windows platforms as well. So, and dare I say, I'm going to add in OS2 there. Wow. If you ever see that, please send me an email, because if you ever see that, I'll be absolutely flabbergasted. There's probably a lot of you out there that haven't even heard of OS2, but look it up. It makes for funny reading. There's also network operating systems as well. So things like Novell NetWare, although it's called N-Directory or some other thing now, I can't remember, it's been years since I've worked with it. And Windows is obviously a networked operating system, but there are others as well that you may come across. You also need to be familiar with the new technologies, so cloud and social media and smart devices. BYO is a big thing now, so we need to be familiar with that sort of thing as well, tablets and the different phone systems. Again, we'll look at those in week 3 in a bit more detail. Join as many computer user groups as you can. There's a few of them there that you can potentially look at, and there'll be others in your own country depending on when you're coming from. But there's lots of different resources out there on the web that you can find, user groups, Facebook groups, message boards, all sorts of things that you can join to help to expand your knowledge. The more you know, the better. Develop your resources again. So exchange your information about techniques related to computer investigation and security. So exchange with other people, interact with other people. Through this online course, you've got access to discussion forums, build your networks, start to talk with other like-minded people, build your skills base. User groups can be helpful, absolutely. Build a network of computer forensic experts and other professionals. Look up people on LinkedIn, look up people on Facebook, okay? Look up some of the research networks. So ResearchGate is a really good website you can go to as well. So you can register with that for free, and you can get in contact with other forensic researchers, and they can help you out. Yes, they're probably more on the academic side, but they'll be able to help you build contacts. You'll get referees, you will find other resources that you won't necessarily get from the industrial or the industry sources. Keep in touch through emails and other networks, so your social media networks. Get professional certifications such as a CISSP. Okay, if you're doing network forensics, look at the CISTO certifications or the Juniper certifications, or maybe if you are desperate, the CompTIA certifications. They're more entry level, but you could start there. Okay, try and build yourself. The more knowledge you have on all these different areas, the better you'll be as a digital forensic investigator. I used to say, as I was coming through the ranks over the 30 odd years that I've been in the IT industry, I started in, as a lot of people will have, on a help desk. I then moved into desktop support, then network operating system support, and then I moved into networking, so pure networking, routing and switching, and then into security, and then to voice over IP, and then into contact center, then into wireless, and all these different areas, all these different layers of knowledge start to build up. So even though now I could not put my hand on my heart and say I am a world-leading expert on any of those things, because I have such a broad range of experiences, and there'll be many of you out there in the same case, you'll be able to apply those really well to digital investigations, and provide that knowledge that you've built up over many years of troubleshooting and designing systems, and apply that to digital forensics. For those of you that don't have those skills yet, it doesn't matter, you'll get them. It takes time. You can't rush experience, okay? You've just got to live through it. So go out there and have a go. Do whatever you can to get whatever experience you can, because while some things might not lead to what you expect, there are no bad experiences really, they're only experiences. Depends on how you react to them and how you use them in the future. So types of digital investigations, we can have two categories. We can really have public investigations, or we can have private or corporate investigations. Public or private, yeah, okay, bit blancmange there, but anyway, that's the way it's written. So public investigations involve government agencies. So we're talking about criminal stuff, criminal investigations, prosecution, where we need things that we need search warrants for. Most Australian states and territories, I don't know why that says most, I would have thought it would have been all, but as I said at the top of the hour, I'm not an absolute expert on the legal side of things. Australian states and territories require search warrants to search a person or premises. Most countries in the world require that as well. There are some that don't, but most countries in the world certainly require that legal processing. In terms of the private or corporate investigations, these deal with private companies, so non-law enforcement. There may or may not be lawyers or solicitors involved. They're not governed directly by criminal law, but they could potentially lead to criminal investigation depending on what the outcome is. And these are generally governed by some sort of internal policy or some sort of governance, or acceptable usage or acceptable behaviour policy that we expect our employers to behave, that we expect them to adhere to, some sort of code of conduct, and they've broken that, and so we're going to perform an investigation and either give them a warning, which you have to do. You need 3 formal warnings in Australia before you can be fired, depending on severe the breakage, the infraction has been. Yeah, so that needs to be done before we can have any remediation. If we just take a step sort of sideways and look at the law enforcement agency investigations, there's a couple of definitions that we sort of need to have an understanding on. we've got a digital evidence first responder. So this is a person that arrives on the incident scene initially, assesses the situation, and then takes precautions to acquire and preserve evidence. Now, the first responder may not necessarily be anyone with any digital knowledge whatsoever, or very much, but their job is to just make sure that nothing's touched, that everything remains as it is, okay? If they do have some sort of digital background, then it's to maybe take some photos of things, make some notes about what's on the screen of a computer or the layout of particular peripherals or system settings or whatever, but it's not necessarily to do anything actively. It's passively looking, seeing what's going on. We then have the digital evidence specialist. So that's the skilled investigator that comes along and starts to determine what's going on, determine what evidence and data is potentially there, what we could potentially seize, and then determine ultimately whether there's other specialists, people with specialist skills that need to be called in to the investigation. And then lastly, an affidavit is a sworn statement of supportive facts about evidence or a crime. So in other words, this is a statement, so a legal statement that you give to say this is what we found, this is what the facts are as we see them, as investigation has seen so far, and they also will include exhibits that support whatever the content of the affidavit is. So you can't just make a baseless claim, you've got to have some evidence to back it up. In criminal cases, a suspect is trialed for a criminal offence, okay, like a burglary, a murder, or molestation, something like that. Computers and networks are only tools that can be used to commit crimes. And many states in Australia have added specific language to the criminal codes to define crimes specifically involving computers. So digital crimes or digital forensic investigations isn't just about investigating digital crimes, so things like fraud or theft of intellectual property or denial of service attacks, those sorts of things, or ransomware, okay? It's also about finding evidence associated with other physical crimes like burglary or murder or assault or car theft, okay? Because those crimes can also be perpetuated using digital resources, obviously. Phones, for example, text messages, emails, okay, social media, all these sorts of things can be used. Following the legal process that you need to follow will be dependent on your local custom, the legislative standards, and the rules of evidence that you are bound by in your jurisdiction, okay? So we're not going to, within this online course, we're not going to talk too much about the details of that, but just be aware that they will exist and that they will be different depending on where you are in the world, depending on where state you are, maybe depending on which county or town you're in. Okay, so you just got to be wary of those as well. A criminal case will then begin when someone finds evidence of an illegal act. Someone will make an allegation, an accusation, or a supposition of fact. The police will then interview whoever makes that complaint, writes a report about the crime. It could even be that it's just witnessed by the police or it's an investigation that starts through them. And then the investigators will delegate, collect, and process the information related to that particular complaint. And that's where we as digital forensic investigators come in, but there'll also be other investigators that aren't handling digital assets that will come in and look at that as well. So it's the same process, whether it's a real physical crime or a digital crime. On a private or corporate investigation, these will involve, regular companies of any size, could be small, could be huge, and potentially lawyers or solicitors who address the company policy violations and they litigate in the disputes related to those. So in terms of corporate computer crimes, it might be something around email harassment, whether that's of a sexual nature or blackmail or something else. Might be falsification of important data or say theft of intellectual property. It could be gender and age discrimination, which does exist. It might be embezzlement. It might be, as Bugs Bunny would say, sabotaging, or it could be industrial espionage. Okay, so all of those.
More Bugs Bunny content, please.
Okay, righto, I can do that. I can do some Porky Pig too. So sabotage or industrial espionage. Okay, they are all valid corporate computer crimes, but it's not exhaustive. There's lots of other things that may occur in that. I mean, you could also. No, I won't take it down that path. I'll leave that for the next one, next week. Understanding corporate investigation. So establishing the company policies is really important. So as an investigator, we need to understand and establish an understanding of what the company policies are around the allegations that have been made, which is a really good way to avoid litigation by publishing and maintaining policies that employees know about. They can read them, they're non-ambiguous, and they know that they are bound to follow them. Okay, if you've got that, then if they do something wrong, you've got a leg to stand on. There's somewhere you can take it. If you don't have those company policies, they're not established, they're not easily accessible, they're ambiguous, or they can't be, they're impossible to understand, and people decide that they don't follow them because there's not company or management support for those policies, then you're in a world of hurt and your investigation's not going to go anywhere. So we need to make sure that they're published, they're concise, they are comprehensive. So across everything that we want behavior to be ruled or managed on, and they are unambiguous, well-defined, and in a place where everyone knows they are and can get access to them freely. And in fact, in my opinion, they should be part of every induction process for all new employees, as long as they're relevant to their job function. One example that business can use to avoid litigation is to simply display a warning banner on computer screens. So like this one says, services for authorized clients only. So if you're not an authorized client, you can't get on. The only thing I would say is that it is not clear necessarily who is authorized. So you could potentially claim that, oh, well, I didn't know I was authorized. I thought I was authorized for this particular system. Okay, so there's a little bit of ambiguity there, in my opinion, with that particular bit there. But that's, banners. These sort of banners are pretty commonplace, particularly in larger organizations. Designating an authorised requester. So an authorised requester has the power to conduct investigations, and policy should be defined by the executive management. Again, you need support from upper level people. If you don't have that, it doesn't work. There are certain groups that within your organisation that should have direct authority to be able to go and request an investigation if they think some policy or procedure within their company has been breached. Okay, and these include these guys here. So corporate security investigations, the ethics office, if you've got one, equal employment opportunity office, internal auditing, or general counsel or legal department. If you haven't got those groups within your organisation, then someone needs to have that authority to ask for an investigation or to perform the investigation themselves, depending on the size of your organisation. When we conduct our security investigations, we have to be aware of the type of situations that we might find ourselves in. So are we looking at abuse or misuse of corporate assets? Are we looking at email abuse, internet abuse? In terms of abuse, I'm not talking about literally swearing or abusing someone. I'm talking about misuse of that service for an unauthorized means. Okay, so those three examples there might be handled slightly differently. Email and internet, misuse are closely related, but misuse of corporate assets, what does that really mean? Are we talking about laptops, servers, switches, routers? What are we actually talking about? It's going to depend on the job role that you're fulfilling. We need to be sure that we distinguish between the company's abuse problems and potential criminal problems, because there's a fine line sometimes between misusing company assets and being the criminal areas, in which case the investigation becomes different, the burden of proof becomes different, the process becomes more stringent because the chain of custody and the rules of best evidence suddenly become a little heavier. And then we have to consider what happens when a civilian or corporate investigative agent delivers evidence to a law enforcement officer. Okay, because as I just alluded to, the burden of proof is slightly different or may be different. Distinguishing personal and company property. So many company policies distinguish between personal and company computer property. And that's because people like to bring their own devices. It can be good for the company because it means they don't have to outlay in assets. But it also can bring a myriad of problems, particularly from a technical aspect in terms of how can we connect this device to a network? How can we protect our network against crime or viruses or other malfunctions coming from those particular devices from a general sense. Then from an investigation perspective, we have to have that understanding of when is the use categorized as business use and when is it categorized as personal use, and what's the overlap. And there's some dodgy ground that you're pretty soft ground that you're standing on there. Skating on thin ice, to use another analogy. So you need to be careful that you have that understanding of where that line between personal and company property and personal and company use is. Because if it's outside, the policies of the company, but it's still criminal, then there might still be an obligation to report it. There's a different phase that opens up. Some useful forensic tools for your learning. So this really leads into later on in our online course, but these are all tools that are useful for you to have a bit of a look at, and they are all tools that are used in the subject ITC 597, which as I said, the online course is based on. So do have a look at those. We will actually, the first hands-on activity for this week actually involves this one here, or Topsy. So you need to download that. And then there's some resources on the Moodle site that you can download. There's a chapter or some pages out of one of the chapters of the actual textbook that we use for this particular subject. And there's an activity there that you can follow along with. So you don't have to have any experience. You just need to download this particular package here with the puppy dog. Install that, and then there's a file on the Moodle site which is a disk image file. You can download that and follow the investigation in the PDF snippet from the chapter. So that's your first online task for the course. OS forensics is something we look at in the last week. In fact, I think we look at all the FTK imager light comes up as well. WinHex comes up in a few slides as well. So these are all tools that we will reference over the next 4 weeks, and you may find will be useful for you to start playing around with. They're all free, or there's free versions of all of them that you can have a look at. OS Forensics is a commercial product, but you can get a free limited version of it, which we'll have a look at in week 4. And you can use that to get some familiarity with tools if you haven't got any idea with forensic tools at this stage. And there you go, hands-on activity topic 1, download Autopsy using that link, and away you go. Then read the PDF document, hands-on activity topic 1, it's called. So that's on the Moodle site. And then there's this file here, which is the accompaniment to it. And then if you read through that PDF, you'll be able to go through the particular investigation step by step and get some experience and get a bit of a feel for what the digital forensic area is like. And there you go, Guy. I have finished 1 minute over. Now, I know you're going to say I haven't answered any questions yet, but
no, I'm very impressed.
I've finished. And if we consider that you probably took up 10 minutes at the start, I've actually probably done pretty well for me. But just for everyone's attention, this will slip out drastically, particularly when we get to week 3. So be prepared for a big one that week. So, all right, Guy, over to you for questions if you've got any. Which I'm sure
there's plenty of them.
I said bugger.
No, you've done your lecture, and that's the thing. Now people can hang around and listen to the questions. There's still 570 of you around, so that's bloody great.
Well, good. We've retained them.
Yeah, and now,
or they're all asleep and forgotten to disconnect.
No, I'm sure that's not the case. Thank you, Matt. Just a couple of quick ones. If you hate the chat, that's okay. you can work around it. There's many ways to do that, and Hannah takes you through it a few times each webinar. My favorite is to use the second screen and hide it on the second screen, maybe even turn it off. But there's a bunch of really good questions. And I want to start with, I guess, the job market and the job role range, which is something that I guess I'm really focused on as part of IT Masters, is about application of the theories to various enterprise settings. So there's questions from Wes, for example, could you pick an area and develop a forensic expertise in that area, notwithstanding your advice to like really, learn a few things. But if you have a broad knowledge, is there the potential, is the job market there to sort of specialize in a particular area? There was also a question from an anonymous attendee. Are these investigations done by an individual or a two-person team? What sort of options are there for people?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot. Obviously, you can get into, I guess, okay, let's look at it from, first of all, if we look at law enforcement type investigations. Now, generally, to be a digital forensic investigator in the law enforcement field, you would, I can't say for certain in all states of Australia because I don't know, but certainly in some states of Australia, the ones that I know about, you actually have to be a police officer for a start. So you've got to have that expertise, if you like, that badge on your CV. Then on top of that, you would then you would then apply to go into a digital forensic area. And whether you would get into that would depend on a number of other things. Let's face it, if you're straight out of high school, straight into the police force, you're there for 3 or 4 years, and then you apply to become a digital forensic investigator, then the expectation is you're probably not going to have the skills that you're going to need for a start, and you'd be trained on the job. Okay, so that's that sort of side on it. You may also come into it from having an extensive IT background in say networking or servers or something. You then join the police force and then you become a forensic investigator with the aim of becoming a forensic investigator, or you could potentially do that with the AFP here in Australia as well, or or other government agencies, if you know what I mean. So you could certainly take that path. So law enforcement is probably a little different in comparison to the private investigation side. With the private investigation side, obviously you have the two options of either working for yourself, and if you do that, if you want to do forensic investigations at a corporate sense, you're not going to be able to do law enforcement type forensic investigations self-employed for a start. That's just not going to happen. That's not available to you, but you can certainly do corporate investigations. And in order to do that, however, if you were to be self-employed, then you would need to have a really broad range of skills. So that's what I'm saying before, learn as much as you can about as many things as you can. Now, I wouldn't advocate someone go into digital forensic investigations straight out of uni or straight out of high school. I think that's way too much to ask. It's the sort of thing that you build up to over many years. So you might, for instance, though, decide that you've been working in server operating systems. So let's say you've been working with Active Directory and Windows systems for 5-10 years, and you decide that you want to do investigations around that particular operating system. You can do that. Okay, the opportunity is there for you to be specifically a investigator around Windows systems. Now, is that necessarily going to help you if you so I guess what I'm saying now, okay, I'll take that back. If you're going to then do investigations and you're going to specialize as a Windows investigator, then you're going to have to work with other people, because digital crimes are not typically perpetuated using one type of digital technology. There are usually multiple digital technologies involved, particularly in that corporate sense. Okay, so you need to either work with someone else or have that broad range of expertise. So I think my overriding advice is, while you can do certain parts of an investigation with very specific technological skills, so say networking or security or server-based skills, in general, if you only had one skill set, you would find it difficult to do a complete investigation. You would need to work with other people, suitably skilled people, to get to the end conclusion. If you've got a broad range of skills though, sure, you could work for yourself, or you could get a job as a consulting forensic investigator from a corporate sense. You might get a job within a HR department or a security team and become a forensic investor that way. The other way you can think of it too is that you could quite easily be a member of a technical security team and be responsible in an incident for providing an investigation of that incident and coming back with some evidence around what happened and who's at fault, and then to determine whether it is something for a disciplinary committee or a criminal proceeding. So you don't always have to be, if you like, we talk about in this particular lecture tonight, and we talk about it in the subject, about being responsible for doing the investigation, presenting the evidence, chain of custody, rules of best evidence, presenting the report, being the expert witness. You don't have to start at that. So you can start doing, sitting on a IT security team or a network team. An incident happens. They might say, hey, Matt, can you have a look at the routers and switches, find out what's going on, keep some evidence, and you follow the same process, and you come back with some information which helps to confirm or deny that something's going on and gives you some idea of what's happening. So that's really, forensic investigation is just troubleshooting on steroids. So it's troubleshooting and documentation to the nth degree. So in answer to the question, yes, there are opportunities, probably not straight, entry level. There's not as many entry level opportunities around as what there are for the more experienced people, but it's definitely a valid and very fulfilling career path if you wanted to take it on.
And
did that answer that?
I sure hope so. It did for me. And as we so often say, Matt, in any of these sort of roles, and you sort of talk about what roles are available and what range is available within a role, so much of it is about transitioning from one emphasis to another, and it'll take a couple of years, like a lot of the skills.
Indeed.
A lot of the skills you were talking about, Matt, what you need to be a successful digital forensic practitioner. The first point was very tech heavy, but then the rest were sort of what frequently called soft skills: professional conduct, common sense, critical thinking, ability to think outside the box, and attention to detail, and then intangibles of persistence.
And I guess the thing is too, particularly from a legal perspective, that's what makes it possible to be, a police officer from no IT background, 3 or 4 years in the force, for example, and you show those soft skills and they go, hey, you're perfect for the job. We can give you the technical skills. As I often say, you can teach people technical skills, but you can't teach people attitude. If you've got a crappy attitude or a crappy outlook on something, that quite often that can't change. But if you've got a good attitude and a good aptitude for digital forensics, that'll shine out in what you're doing. You can learn the other technical skills. None of these tools that we've talked about, none of these skills that I've talked about, are things that are beyond the realm of mere mortals. It's all possible. You just have to have that attribute of persistence.
And if you're low on IT expertise, CSU does a course that IT Masters has very little to do with, and Hannah chucked a link to that course in the chat. So if you scroll up, you can find that and go and have a look. And it's a good sort of bridging sort of course. It's a bit, particularly if you're interested in the public investigations, you can sort of do the policing side of things and then learn the tech stuff. Or of course, if it's suitable for you, you can go the other way around. There were a lot of questions when you were talking about hashing. My first one is, what's a hashing? Because for those of you that aren't aware, I'm not very tech savvy, but there's a few questions. Which hashing standard do you use? Can you give us an example of documents with different hashing? And then there was one little brief snippet in the chat that I saw about hash collisions. So I was just wondering if you could talk about them Whoever was talking about it was saying hash collision in theory versus the likelihood of actually seeing it in practice.
Yep, good question. So I guess the simplest way to answer that is to say that a hash is a mathematical algorithm. That's all. It's a mathematical equation. That's literally what it is. And what you do is you take that mathematical algorithm is built into a little program. So it might be just a command line program, or it could be a Windows-based command line program. I'll get it out in a minute. So it can be a Windows app, or it can be a command line tool. Why didn't I just say that? Anyway, so it's a mathematical algorithm built within a tool. And what you do is you take a document or a file and you pass that file, you give that file to that application or command line, and that command line analyzes it, and it passes all the bits and bytes of that particular file through the mathematical algorithm, and it spits out a result. Okay, and it's called a hash value, and it's literally just a string of hex digits. So hex digits are 0 to 9, A to F. So it spits out a value of hex digits. How big that hash value is determined by the hashing algorithm that you use. So there's a number of them. The two ones that most people will probably be familiar with are MD5 and SHA-256. Okay, so they're hashing algorithms. So then once you have that value, once it spits out that hash for you, that hash value, you now have a value that represents that particular file as that file is exactly. Now, if you were to go and change that file somehow, so as I said before in the example, you've got a letter that you've written to your grandmother in a Word document, you save it, you run it through the hashing algorithm, the hashing tool, and it spits out a hash value. You then think, oh, I forgot to say something to grandma. And you open up the document again and you add in another sentence and you save it again. If you were to run that document through the hashing algorithm again, the hashing tool again, it would spit out a completely different hash value. Okay, they would not be the same because the document has changed. So what that hashing value provides you with is proof that a document has either changed or that a document has not changed. So it proves the integrity of that document. And the way we use that in communication and security is to say, actually, I'll use a digital forensics example, of course. Why wouldn't I? I'm in a digital forensics course. So if I had a hard drive, for example, that I wanted to investigate for evidence, I would take my hashing algorithm without going through all the steps that you need to do, but you'd take the hashing algorithm, the hashing program, and you'd run it on the whole disk itself, okay, on the image of the disk. And it would spit out a value, okay, say ABCD. That's the value it spits out. We then take our copying tool and we make a direct copy of that hard drive, because as I said, we don't want to work on the hard drive, because if we do, we run the potential of introducing errors into that hard drive and therefore changing the potential evidences there. So from a legal perspective, we don't want to do that. So we make a copy of that hard drive and we come up with an image, okay, a copy of that hard drive, but it's an image, it's just called an image file. We then take that same hashing tool and we run the image through it. So what we're looking for is for the hashing tool to spit out the same value for the image as it does for the hard drive. Because if it does, so it spits out ABCD, then we know that the image we got is an exact replica of the hard drive. Nothing's changed. We know that because mathematically, that's what the hashing algorithm does. So we know now that the image we have is an exact copy of the original evidence, original hard drive. Now we can go and do our investigations on that. However, if in the process of making that copy of the hard drive to the image, we mess something up, there's a mistake made or something doesn't copy properly, then the image won't be the same. And when we run it through the hashing algorithm, instead of spitting out ABCD, it might spit out DCBA. So it gives us a different value, and we look at it, we go, okay, there's something wrong here. They're not the same anymore. So we've got to go back and repeat the process. Similarly, it then allows us to go to court and say, here are our hash values. When we made the copy of the original evidence hash value is ABCD, the copy was ABCD, therefore we can prove mathematically that we have exactly the same evidence in the two spots. So we can go and do our investigations and have no fear that anything was wrong. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question about what a hash is and why we use it. Now, in terms of the hash collisions that someone mentioned, so a hash collision occurs when the output from a hash, so we take a file, we take two different files, we run them through the same hashing algorithm. Now, because they're different files, they should spit out different values, but a hash collision occurs when they don't, they spit out the same value. Now, the likelihood of this happening, this is possible to happen simply because mathematical algorithms, because they're written by humans, are not truly random. Okay, so there is a limit to how many values, depending on the bit size that you use, like 256-bit algorithm compared to a 56-bit algorithm or a 512-bit algorithm, will spit out a larger value. So there is a possibility that you might have two files that are completely different that will come to the same output. Okay, and that's called a hash collision. Now, the likelihood of that happening is not very high, infinitesimally small. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's exceptionally unlikely. And look, to be honest, off the top of my head, I couldn't give you an estimation of what that would be, but it's infinitesimal, very, very, almost impossible. So what do they say? It's computationally infeasible, which means that the time it would take for you to generate a collision is so great that by the time you generated it, it wouldn't matter anyway. That's basically what it's saying. So it's computationally infeasible, not impossible, but extremely unlikely.
One of the downsides of being the MC for these short courses is actually not being able to properly listen to the answers as I'm triaging the rest of the questions. I'm sure that was very interesting. I'm sorry,
it's
Matt.
Mathematical, so no, it wasn't.
No, I'm going to go and listen to the recording.
No, it's, I know about, you forget I've got a graduate diploma in psychology, so I understand the cognitive dissonance you have between the two tasks.
Oh, I just can't focus on the answer while I'm reading other people's questions. It's really
No,
upsetting.
well, I can't. That's why I close the questions as well. Otherwise, I'd get off track too.
Excellent. Just a mea culpa in the middle of that, folks. Erin has asked about the responsibilities of a first responder, one of the roles in the earlier slides. Would first responders also undertake mitigating actions, disconnecting from the network, for example, to minimize criminal activity, or is that the different role in that sort of triad of roles?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that is going to be a little bit dependent on their level of knowledge. So you will have some first responders. So if they're specifically a digital investigation forensic specialist, or someone who's at least partially skilled. So if we look at the example of the police force, if you're a forensic investigator, but you're not heavily experienced, but you've got some experience, you may actually do things like that. So you may get to a scene, a crime scene, and see a whole heap of messages scrolling up on a screen. You think, my God, it's deleting everything on the hard drive. What do I do? Pull the power. Absolutely. You could do that because you're then preserving evidence. If you were just, a complete newbie or knew nothing about, so you're a police officer that knew nothing about digital systems at all, then that's probably not something you would feel comfortable doing. You might be able to, you'd still potentially need to do it if that action was happening, like there was stuff being deleted, but you might not feel comfortable doing it. So it's going to come down to the relative experience and skill set of whoever is first on the scene.
Beauty, thank you. I've asked Hannah to stop taking new questions just because we could go all night, and we likely will anyway. But so if we don't get to your question, that'll be it. There was a really interesting question from Ishmael. Does digital forensics include maintaining, deploying, coding software to conduct forensics investigations? is automation of these tasks prevalent, possible?
Yes, sort of, and yes. So the first part is really more about development. So that is something that you would probably do in a different context. So you may not do that as a digital forensic investigator, but you would do that as a developer of software for that. Although it is possible that you may be one in the same. If you work for yourself, you might decide to write your own bespoke tool for sure. In terms of automation of the tasks, now, there are a number of tools that you could use that will heavily automate tasks for you. The only thing I'd be careful of with that, if you're getting something like a commercial package like Ncase, for example, there are a number of things that will automate. So you basically point and click and away it goes in some parts of the investigation. So it automates a lot of things for you, but it's very, very, very strictly controlled. The issue I would have is if you just took some tools of your own and you decide to automate and do some scripts, that's fine. But again, if you're using it in a legal sense, you'd have to be a billion%, even though that doesn't exist, you'd have to be 1,000,000,000% sure that your scripts were spot on, were absolutely perfect. Otherwise, you run the risk of errors being introduced. The advantage of being able to run a tool, see the output, run another tool, see the output, run the first tool again, see the output, is that at each step on the way, there's a certain result that you'll be expecting, and you can see whether that expectation is met. And if it's not, you can then delve a little deeper. Or what happened there? Did I make a mistake? Has something gone wrong? Have I destroyed something? And if you have, then you can go back to another copy of the evidence and start again. If, however, that's all scripted and that's all automated, and you start introducing errors and you're not noticing them, it can send you down a rabbit hole that you may never recover from. So so the answer is yes, you can automate a lot of these things. It is possible, but I would probably advise against it unless you are exceptionally experienced and you are exceptionally sure that what you are automating is a simple task that is going to provide a known output, if that makes sense. So be careful with it.
Thank you. Combining couple questions. How are we adapting to emerging technology? Kay James is asking about difficult to trace tools such as Tails OS. Alfred's interested in the advancements in Internet of Things and Internet of Everything. I guess is policy and I guess legal and are policy and legal frameworks keeping up? What are some of the challenges around that?
So the answer to that question is poorly. In my opinion. And that's hardly surprising, really. I mean, security in all facets has always been largely a reactive type industry, let's face it. While there are lots of standards and best practices and rules of thumb and blah, 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 that we can do in security to protect ourselves against a whole myriad of different things and a whole heap of basic principles, there is always going to be that zero-day effect. There's always going to be someone who knows more. There's always going to be a vulnerability that we forgot about. There's always going to be a patch that we install that creates a vulnerability that we don't know about. So all those things are always going to exist. And from a digital forensic perspective, particularly around legislation, policy and procedure, I mean, man, oh man, the red tape around that, getting changes to those and keeping pace with the huge pace that technology has, I mean, look, it's more or less impossible. And that's why sometimes you will see legislation around digital forensics being very broad and seemingly vague, but that's because there's so many things that could potentially change, so many different platforms, so many different directions in which you could go that you can't specify every single specific thing in a timely fashion and get it through the 4,000 billion different red stamps it's got to get, rubber stamps it's got to get through to become legislation. So from that point of view, there's legislation, there's policies and procedures in all organisations that are in place that are helpful, but are they keeping pace with what is potentially out there? No, absolutely not. I think for the majority of companies, there are certain companies that will be attacked certain ways, and they will always be attacked certain ways, and there will always be certain crimes and infractions of policies that exist around a certain organization. So if you like, they've got a baseline of infractions and a baseline of crime that surrounds that particular organization or enterprise or industry. And so if the legislation and policies and procedures take all that into consideration, then we could potentially be safe or within our own little world for a period of time. But if we're talking about industries or organizations that are getting, 0-day attacks all the time, or, different sorts of crimes are perpetuated using their systems or their technologies, then it can be really difficult to keep pace with that. The other thing we sort of alluded to throughout the session was we're talking about, yes, we can talk about digital crimes. So specifically traditional digital crimes like, the email blackmail and the embezzlement and intellectual property theft and those sorts of things. And that's great. But if we think about crimes like murder or assault or car theft or robbing a bank or those sorts of things that can also be assisted through the use of technology, then they are a lot more static. They're a lot more static, and so legislation that surrounds the investigation of those type of crimes, which are assisted rather than facilitated by digital assets, that's a different question. Then I think in those terms, we're probably doing okay, but from a strictly digital perspective, there's always going to be those issues in making sure that we've got the mechanisms in place to respond to digital crimes when they occur. That's always going to be a really big challenge. And of course, then the evolution of security tools and security best practices around digital forensics are always, slightly lagging behind the infiltration of crimes and the bad things that are happening. So there's always going to be that balance. There's always probably going to be that little lag behind, even though the gap has closed significantly over the last 25, 30 years. So even though the different attack vectors and different crimes and the way crimes are committed using technology is evolving over time, the gap between that and the remediations that we put in place and the ways we can investigate and find evidence of those crimes, that that gap is a lot closer than what it used to be. So we're not far behind, but I think realistically we're probably always going to be behind. And that's that's notwithstanding talking about organizations which are far beyond the scope of this online course and my areas of expertise, but places like the DOJ and CIA and those mythical organizations that we see in all the movies, what they've got and what they can do is far beyond what I understand. But then there's also obviously hacker groups and criminal groups that have a similar level of knowledge. So, there's always going to be that trade-off, I think.
And then we're back to questions of ethics. Paul, that will probably answer your question. If an investigator cannot resolve the issue, probably because we're behind in some guys, what about the money paid by the customer? No doubt it's either a sunk cost or you might be able to have,
Well, there'll be certain things written into when you enter into an agreement like that. You enter into a contract that will have certain stipulations. So it may be that the investigator will say, it might be we don't find anything or we can't do it, you don't pay type thing, simple that. Or it might be, depending on what we find, you might pay this amount, or there'll be some sort of contractual agreement.
The TV lawyer ads, no win, no fee.
That's
very
right.
exciting. Do you have any interesting or hilarious or terrifying or sad case studies about digital forensics or any famous forensic blunders that you could share?
Probably not off the top of my head, actually.
I suppose they'd be pretty well hidden.
Well, yeah, forensic blunders certainly are. Most people don't. I've certainly got some horror stories, mainly around, and there's lots of them on. Actually, we can probably post a couple of videos up on on the resources page for you guys, but there's some absolute hilarious ones on YouTube, but they're mainly centered around testimony. So people who have done forensic investigation, they're supposedly the expert witness, and they've gone to testify and just made a complete hash of what they're talking about. And one I can remember specifically was a gentleman talking about an investigation he did around a murder crime, where the timestamps and the location of the phone proved that the accused was actually in the same area as the murder was committed, and the exact same spot as the body was found, and all that sort of stuff. But he had to explain in court what the GPS coordinates and the differences in the timestamps meant, and how they related to the crime scene, and how they proved they were there. And he just makes a complete hash of it. It totally embarrasses himself in live court. So that's an interesting, funny one. And I really felt, you could see the poor guy, he just shrinks down further and further in his chair. And the more the defense lawyer asks him questions, the further he gets off track, and he ends up just basically, crying tears and calling for his mum. He was that embarrassed. So that's probably the worst one I've seen. But there are certainly examples of it's mainly around people who don't follow process or don't follow chain of custody. They are typically the two big things that will that I've seen anyway in my experience, that have totally messed up forensic investigation. So someone just handing over a hard drive to someone, say, oh, here, stick this in the evidence locker or whatever, and they don't make, and then suddenly it gets lost, or it ends up in someone's desk drawer, or it's left on a desk and then picked up by someone else who formats it to put their PlayStation games on or something, because they don't know what it is. So there's plenty of things like that around chain of custody, and also around people taking the original evidence and starting investigation on that, and then completely destroying it, and then not having anything to go back on. Lots of different examples of that. Couldn't even guess how many times that would have happened.
Yeah, as Andre Q in the chat has said, though, at least he wasn't a cat. For those of you who aren't sure what that is, Google. I'm not a cat.
Yes.
Only a few questions left, so thanks for sticking around, folks. We've covered certifications a little bit. CHFI from EC Council, is this a good certification?
Oh, wow. How long is a piece of string? It is good within a context, yes. I would say it's a good introductory forensic course. I guess I'm probably a little, and I'll say this up front, I'm a little biased in that I'm not a huge fan of the EC Council certifications. I'm also not a huge fan of the CompTIA certifications. I'll let that be known too. That's not to say they are not good certifications within a context. And I think I'm probably looking at it from a biased perspective, in that they've come along, these certifications, which I consider to be quite entry level, have come along at a time where I've had 30 plus years in the industry. So I'm looking at it with a different look to what I would have 30 years ago had they been around then. But funny you should say that the CHFI is actually the one that we base the subject 513 on, digital forensic investigations. So I obviously thought enough of it to base the subject on it. So yes, I think it's a good entry level. It's a good starting place to go. It's good. It's generic. It provides you with good process, good procedural ideas, rules of thumb, gives you a little bit of access to tools. They don't talk about tools too much, obviously, because that varies. You've got to be careful with how much you say about tools, particularly because it's based on the experience of the person using it. You can make activities foolproof, but they are not foolproof to a sufficiently talented fool, I think is a saying that's relevant there. But look, it's a good entry-level certification. That's probably what I'd say. But if it's not something that I would hang my hat on, saying if I get this certification, it'll mean I'm a shoe-in for a digital forensic job.
Yep.
I think I'll put it that way.
That's the thing with, not only this particular certification, but all certifications, all postgraduate qualifications or undergraduate qualifications. It's about, finding, I guess, the right balance between your objectives, your existing experience. It's so subjective, and it so much depends on who you know as well.
Yeah.
And really, like these are the sorts of discussions we like to have, when we contact you directly, from that poll earlier. It's like if it's not right to do XYZ, study certifications, change careers, like we like to discuss why. And it really depends on what you want as much as anything. So there's so many options, and we live in an era of, I guess, user pays education and certifications as sort of marketing tools, and it's all like a bizarre, stupid, crazy world. And
certainly is.
Really depends what you want and when you want it and why you want it and all those sorts of things. But hey, let's have a long-winded chat, because there's nothing better than that when it comes to talking about postgrad education and IT careers.
Absolutely.
Last couple of questions I'll combine. Scott and Steve, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for hanging around. They're talking about e-discovery. Is e-discovery something to do with digital forensics? And during e-discovery, they're talking about evidence gathered being admissible in court, and illegally obtaining evidence. So let's get back to some ethics chat there. Is there a bigger problem with digital forensics than standard forensics in terms of illegally obtained evidence?
The opportunities for illegally obtaining evidence in digital forensics, I think, is the scope for it is probably larger potentially than standard forensics. And I say that with the caveat that I'm not heavily experienced in standard forensics. So I'm not but the potential for discovering, if you like, so finding things without the proper authority in a digital forensic the scope would be larger, I would think. So it'd be easier to do. You can hide away in a closet somewhere, a la DOJ, CIA, ONI, those sort of places. So yeah, that's definitely, I think that the scope is probably larger. It's also one of those things, it has that potential to be larger simply because you can hide away and be a bit anonymous, and you can grab something and then send it off to someone and say, hey, have a look at this, what's going on here. Completely inadmissible in court, just hearsay, but easy to do and easy to do it anonymously. So the scope for it, I think, is much larger. In terms of e-discovery, think about Novell now. In terms of e-discovery being included within the digital forensics umbrella, not something that we would normally discuss in either of our subjects. So, and not something that I would generally expect to be tightly in a ethical digital forensics environment. But having said that, if we're talking about it, being a problem, then there is a potential for it, I guess. Yeah, but it's not something we would normally bracket under the digital forensics umbrella. So that's a simple answer to that one as well.
Beauty, thank you. Geez, very close to 100 questions tonight. So thank you everyone for sending those in. They really do, as you can no doubt tell.
Wow, there was too. Holy cow!
Augment the discussion. We've got the hour of lecture and then the Q&A session. So feel free to chuck them in. We always love them. And anything that didn't get answered, just chuck it in the forum. There's 3,000 of you out there listening along in some form or another. Just throw the ideas around, have some disagreements respectfully, of course, and just sort of see what you can come up with. The course is as good as you lot make it, really. We'll try our best. And if you want anything, chuck a request in the forum as well, and we'll see if we can comply. It's really, I think you are the best resource we have in these short courses, with the possible exception of Matt Constable in the ones.
No. Definitely, you know, we are all stronger than we are together. We are stronger than we are singularly, without a doubt.
Yeah, agreed. And none of this would be possible without Hannah. So thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Matt. I'll leave it to you to sign off, and we'll have a chat about next week, and see you all next week. Have a great week.
Well, thank you, Guy, as well. Huge thanks to you. You are the glue that keeps these MOOCs from going completely off the rails. Although sometimes, particularly when you put those polls up that you do early in the night, I question that. But generally, you are the glue. You are the thing that keeps you on the rails. So thank you very much, and thank you to everyone listening out there for attending. Fantastic numbers for this evening. I hope you found it informative. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you come back next week, because we're going to be talking about data acquisition. So the different theories and some different topics around acquiring data from our evidence repositories, whatever they are. So quite interesting next week. So please turn up, and I look forward to seeing you all back at that same time. But yeah, thank you for your attendance. It's much appreciated to see so many interested people here and holding on for. Thank you for your questions as well. So yep, thank you from me, and that's really it for this evening.